All right. Okay, the third time's the charm, right?
Yeah, or the fourth or the fifth. We'll try as many times as we need
Well, it
to.
looks like my video's working, which is good. So, all right.
Whoop. Right? Our primordial stream, as you named it, up since 6 a.m. So excited to do this one.
Yep.
And it only took us half an hour to set up. So that's a progress. The last time it took us an hour. So we're getting better. We're getting so close
Yeah, we'll
to
get there.
launching on. Yeah, I'm just messing with you. Anyway, we have so many exciting things to talk about. By the way, let's do introductions because I don't think people have ever seen us on Twitch. So my name is Christos Matskas. I work for the identity team as a developer advocate, and my partner in crime is.
I'm John, JP, JPD. I have to listen for a lot of different things. So we hang out with developers and try to make their lives better and using Microsoft's identity stack. So both of us have worked for Microsoft for a while. I've spent a lot of time working with Azure and building software that uses Azure, and so anyone who's building software that uses Azure certainly has to use Azure AD at least at some point. So I've spent a lot of time doing it, and now we want to share that love with everybody else.
So in other words, people can't escape Azure AD. And since they can't escape it, they might as well learn how to use it properly, right?
That's right. It is inescapable.
I love it. And talking about inescapable, change is always coming. And we recently announced that we are deprecating our ADAL library, our first iteration of the authentication library that we used for people to allow them to authenticate against Azure AD, get tokens, and then go and speak to other services. And It's been out for a while, and I think it's a good time now to move to MSAL, which has also been out for a while. And today's stream, I think, is going to focus on this one. There's a blog post that we published on the 22nd. We can share the link later, but it's on the Tech Community Identity blog. And what we are saying here is that starting on June 30th, 2022, ADAL will no longer be supported. So you have time to start migrating to MSAL. And our stream today is going to focus on this. We're going to show you how to take a .NET app, not a .NET Core app, a .NET app, if we find one that uses ADAL out there in the wild, and then see what it takes to migrate from ADAL to MSAL and how you can benefit from the latest and greatest.
Yeah, because MSAL's biggest advantage is being scope-based instead of resource-based. So in the past, if you wanted to use the graph, you just asked for graph and you hoped that your app registration was configured appropriately with all the permissions you needed. And now you ask for permissions as you need them, right?
Exactly.
It's a big advantage when you're building apps that want to take advantage of graph, but especially if not everybody who uses your app is going to use that functionality. You don't want to ask for it up front, especially if you have to ask for a lot of permissions to do different things. So one of the big reasons to start looking at moving to MSAL is to start using scopes instead of resources. And that's one of the things we're going to look at a little bit later on today, too.
Perfect. And also to clarify, there used to be a Azure AD Graph, and there's also MS Graph, Microsoft Graph. Azure AD Graph is also being sunsetted at the same time, which is important because if you are currently using Azure AD Graph, you should start looking into migrating into the Microsoft Graph. The nice thing is that most of the APIs are currently available, so we have full feature parity with Azure AD Graph, so there's no reason for you to be using Azure AD Graph anymore. And with that said, let's cut some code, man.
All right.
I'm going to stop sharing so you can open your Visual Studio and do your magic. And first we need to find an app. So we're going to go hunting.
Yeah, so we've got the one that we found earlier. Although I don't think either of us were too pleased with that one.
It used to seem like it was stuck in time, almost a snapshot of what ADAL used to be, and then the API changed. So we picked an ADAL implementation that is not particularly mainstream, but I suspect that some people may have used it already. So we might as well show you how to benefit from changing it.
Yeah, and I think some of the other interesting stuff is that we've almost ended up in a place where the libraries that this sample used have been updated sort of underneath it, and so some of the docs that went along with it don't match anymore. That went along with that sample. They're talking about specific redirect URIs and paths that just don't exist anymore. So, of course, Visual Studio is not responding. So just another typical, just another morning with Visual Studio, I guess.
It's a Tuesday morning.
Yeah, it's a day ending in Y. So.
Is it? What does it say? Oh, look at that! The milk screen.
Yeah.
What are you doing in Visual Studio? Are you running a preview?
Yeah, I mean, why not, right?
Yeah, everything is a preview on my machine, by the way, which is surprising how things work.
I mean, the thing is, I haven't seen a screen like a full lockup like that in a long time. Of course, it's today.
Today of all days.
So let's get this solution loaded up here. We'll try again. And this one is this was one of the ones from
the samples, right?
From the samples, yeah. This is from one of the V1 samples, and we got lots of V2 samples out now. But a lot of those V2 samples are either using .NET Core or something. And a lot of them are net new. So a lot of them are like, hey, this is a brand new app, right? This is this is something that we're building from the ground up, and that's not super useful if you've got an old application that you need to update, right?
Yeah, we tend to be super excited about using the latest and greatest, which means that sometimes we forget that people are still using older, more legacy. I don't want to say legacy because .NET full framework is not legacy yet, but people may have 10-year-old code running out there perfectly fine. There's no reason to update or change unless they're looking for benefiting from the cloud or benefiting from containers or what have you. So .NET will still serve you fine, but it's hard to find samples these days, especially in our libraries that address that older technology. In quotes older, again. Don't want to sound too, how do you call it? Preferential to latest stuff.
Well, and this is .NET 4.6.1, I believe, which 4.6.1 was one of those that shipped with an earlier version of Windows, like Windows 7, Windows 8-ish time frame. Mm-hmm. So this is 4.6.1.
4.8 is currently the mainstream, so... Yeah. We're not going to change the target framework. We're not going to change anything in the framework itself. We don't want to rewrite the app. What we're looking to do is take the authentication code and make it use MSAL.
Yep.
And this is an ASP.NET Core app, right? It's an ASP.NET web app, the traditional ASP.NET web app.
Yeah.
And yeah.
And this web app uses sort of some of the older OWIN middleware for authentication. So this one has... if you'll notice down here a little bit further down the code, it's got things like use Twitter, use Facebook, use Google, which those were the old OWIN mechanisms from a long time ago. It feels like it was a long time ago.
Should we give people a tour of the solution before we start hacking into things,
Sure.
Especially if they're not familiar with OWIN and how it works? Because OWIN was the middleware for the traditional ASP.NET. Back in the day, because there wasn't a middleware, so OWIN was a plugin to that. And if you never used it, it's a little bit. It requires a little bit of a setup to make sure that it kicks off as you start up. So there are some conventions there you need to be aware of, like the startup name of the class.
Yep. So this is our startup class, and you'll notice it's a partial class, and the actual name of this file is startup.auth. In our actual startup file, the only thing we're really doing is calling configureauth out of our configuration method, right?
Yep.
And it has this specific attribute that says, hey, this is our startup. This is our OWIN startup, right? Mm-hmm. And so this is sort of the flag that says, hey, this class of this type, this startup class, is what we're going to use for sort of for bootstrapping the middleware, I suppose, when you say that. And configureauth is taking in this app builder, and configureauth itself, it's over here in the startup.auth, right? So here's our configureauth. So your solution may look similar to this. It may look totally different, especially depending on how you did this startup in your own at the time. I've got solutions that still use the global ASAX
those were the days. Love it.
for authentication work, because that was where it needed to be done. And in fact, global ASAX is still where you do an application start. That's still where you're configuring most of your ON bootstrapping, right?
Yeah.
I remember having the WS, what was it, the old WIF stuff, Windows Identity Framework, would all live in global ASAX.
Man.
And
Yeah.
funny enough, a lot of the code itself fundamentally really hasn't changed that much. It's just been shuffled around and shoveled in corners and moved around, whatever.
And we made it a lot easier these days. Like, you don't have to go through this insane dance to set up your middleware and provide attributes and have special conventions for your startup names and partial classes. It's the middleware in .NET Core is absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, much better experience than we've had in this sort of. I kind of feel like this was transitional, because this is very close to .NET Core in terms of syntax and how you're, what you're seeing, but pretty different under the hood, right?
Ditto. Yeah.
So
is our app running right now?
Yeah,
we tested it yesterday, right?
Yeah, let's fire it up and let's see what we get. So this is using IIS Express. That's how old this is.
Well, .NET Core can also use IIS Express, but you don't need to anymore, right?
Yeah, but why would you?
Well, there are, not IIS Express, but for IIS, it's the same as using any other web server.
Yeah.
.NET Core, if it's running under Kestrel, has no notion of shutdowns, it has no notion of throttling, it has no notion of filtering. There are people that have created some really elaborate solutions on top of IIS, and they want to benefit from these. So if you're running your ASP.NET Core, the recommendation is to run behind service, whether it's IIS Express or Apache or anything else, because it handles your solution. But I agree. When you're testing locally, you want to go as fast as possible. So Kestrel is always my default go-to for .NET Core.
So what's the future for production hosting, like, of Kestrel? Are we ever going to be in a place where we feel like Kestrel can be the main front door for a web app, or do we still want to put it behind Nginx or IIS or something else?
We have evolved Kestrel to do quite a few things. For example, there was no HTTPS termination, so you couldn't do HTTPS on Kestrel alone. You needed IIS. Now we added that. We added some extra features for Kestrel to allow you to run it as a standalone. However, even if you're running on containers or Kubernetes, you still need some front door to manage the lifecycle of your application. Remember, Kestrel will run as a daemon. If something throws an exception or if something dies, then Kestrel dies with it, and then your app goes down. So suddenly you don't have the ability to start it up again. Whereas IIS will go, oh, your process terminated, let me start it up for you.
Yep.
Same for Apache. There's also logging on top of that and abilities to do filtering or what have you. So there are probably some scenarios that Kestrel would be enough, but the official recommendation is if you're running a production solution, Kestrel should not be running naked. It should be behind IIS or Apache or whichever web server you want.
Okay, good to know.
So that's the app running. Awesome.
Yeah, so the app runs,
First
it
step.
builds at least, and runs.
Always a good first step.
So this app has a couple different identity providers in it, which is kind of neat. So this one's doing local login, which is just ASP.NET Identity Database, right? Like a database that you would run like yourself, which is completely foreign to me. But if for whatever reason you were required to, or you had to store usernames and passwords, this app did that as well, but also had this concept of sort of extra login, right, of external services. And because we've enabled the Microsoft one in our code, that's why that one shows up. So if we scroll down through here, you'll notice where we've got app.use Microsoft account authentication. And if we
that was commented out, and then we added it, right?
Yeah. And if we were to uncomment some of these others, like say Twitter, then we would also see
Twitter as an option.
We'd also see Twitter as an option. Of course, we don't have any of the keys or anything set, so we wouldn't be able to use it. But we would be able to. We'll see it show up in the login page.
Does the database store? So when you log in with Twitter, it brings back the user metadata. Do we still create an entry in the database? If I remember correctly, it used to do something like that where it would store something locally. Can't remember if it was the user ID from Twitter or something else. So it had a notion of, yes, you're logging in with an external provider, but I'm also registering you in the database. But I can't remember if that's still the case.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure this sample does that, because typically you'll get some data from the identity system, be it Twitter or Facebook or Azure AD or whatever, but you still have extra metadata about those users. Right, like you've still got some. I didn't provide one, so I guess it's smarter than just doing it with an empty string.
But we know that it's working, right? So
right.
We proved.
Proof. So yeah, but one of the things that you typically want to do, or typically have to do, is you'll get some data from the identity system, but you still need to store some data about a user somewhere else.
Yeah.
And typically that ends up being in your app database, right? I mean, the data that you store about the user may just be an opaque string. It doesn't mean anything to you. It's just a sort of what it looks on the surface like it's just a random string, but it's just a unique ID from the identity provider, right?
Yeah. So you can match back. I think the reason why you need to do that is if you have, say, an online business where you sell stuff, then you allow your users to log in with an external provider. But then if they buy things off your site, you need to map that user to your purchases and dispatching and invoicing and what have you. Yep. If you don't have that information, it becomes very hard for you to trace those users. So that's the reason why it's happening.
Well, and I think too, like there's something to be said around things like privacy and GDPR and PII. Like if I'm only storing a name identifier of you, which is typically like name identifier might be an old term for it, but there's things like the name identifier, the subject claim, and the claim set that comes back. You can look at a subject claim and it only gives you a unique ID. That's it.
Right. Yeah.
And if a user chooses not to share their name from the identity provider, for example, they don't have to. They may, you may capture their name ID and store it in your database as an identifier for them, but they may decide to give you a completely separate name from what their identity system knows them as, right? And that's cool. Like we should let our users choose, right? Like store the bare minimum amount of information you need to about them. Because it makes your life a lot easier in the future. If somebody comes in with a deletion request, and you've got their email address and their name littered throughout your database, right? Like that's a bigger issue than something you'd want than just storing a unique name identifier and slapping a GUID on it for your own purposes and littering the GUID throughout your database. Now you've got lots of information about a user without it being any PII, and that's cool.
Brilliant.
Way easier than dealing with it on your own. In fact, that's what got me into this. Like, it was like 2010 or so, and I was working with a guy, and we started building some software on the side. And one of the things we talked about was like, we don't want to own any user data if we don't have to. Like, I don't want to store anything about a user unless we have to. And we wanted our sign up to be dead simple. Like, we wanted to capture the least amount of information possible. And at the time, the app was a way for you to. It was like a giant chat room where you would sign up, and if you were an attorney, you would sign up and say, "Hey, I'm bankruptcy attorney in North Carolina," right? And so users would come to the site and they'd say, "Hey, I need a bankruptcy attorney in North Carolina. Here's my question." And the users' questions would get blasted out to all the attorneys in North Carolina who said they were, bankruptcy attorneys. Pick the criteria. The criteria in our
Uh-huh.
case was specific to attorneys, so it didn't really matter. But so when people signed up, all we really needed from them was a phone number. That was it. We just needed a phone number to which they wanted to receive a text message. We really didn't need their name. We didn't need anything else. So we captured their phone number and we captured their bar number because they were attorneys, right? And but we used external signups, so Facebook, Google, Microsoft, like all the different providers way back in the day. And they flowed through Azure ACS, which was Access Control Services at the time. And what was neat about it, though, was I would receive a set of claims about them that were super bare bones. They had virtually no information in them because we didn't need that extra info, you know.
Yep.
And so I would create an identity with ASP.NET Identity in our membership database with a random, like, 7 GUIDs, you know, concatenated together password. And then go through all of our registration routines, just like if you'd signed up with an email address and a password, only the only way that you could sign in was through a social provider. And so we stored a ton of data about the users, the chats that they were having, and all their phone numbers and whatever that they needed to store. So like they generated a lot of data in the service, but we stored virtually no personal info about the users. And we never were in a position where we had to worry about somebody stealing that membership database, because if they did, there's nothing they could do with it anyway. You know.
Nice. Yeah.
So,
delegate authentication, my friend.
Yeah.
That's all the word.
So I was kind of smitten. I was like, oh, this was super easy. I can go build the other stuff I actually need to build.
Yep.
To make the service work. And then we ended up, and that's how I ended up getting into all this anyway. So, sorry, it was a little detour, but whatever.
See, we saw a little glimpse of younger JP.
I don't know. You know, I'll probably crack that. I mean, that might be a good thing to crack open one day on our stream. Is looking at some of that old code and how we had to do it way back in the day, and maybe. Even
Oh God, I've made so many mistakes when it comes to writing software and side projects and actually getting code to run in production. We can have probably weeks of content just telling about all war stories, successes and failures. I think it's
well, no, but
it's both.
I think there's something to be said about you know, also being in a position to update some of it, right? I mean, hey,
Yeah.
my code today isn't any good. So looking at old bad code of mine from 10 years ago, it's just like looking at code from 10 weeks ago. It's like it's all bad. So what's the concern, right?
Yeah, true. My only regret is back in 2007, 2006, there was no GitHub.
That's true.
Where you could store these things. So I've lost a lot of work I've done in the past because it was in some random drive. So I need to go and digging into some old things to find it.
Yeah, like I've got an old TF, like Team Foundation version control project.
Whoa, nice.
And and in fact, I just moved some of this old repository over into a Git repo from TF.
Right.
And I mean, some of these have got. I mean, some of these pieces of code are 10 years old. So it's pretty. I don't know. It's kind of wild to go back down. You go back down memory lane and see it. Like you use Azure Web and worker roles. You know, it's just pretty old. Pretty old stuff. So anyway, back to our matter at hand.
I think you need to continue on your own while I deliver my session online for service principles and MSI.
All right.
So by the time I get back, you should have everything sorted. And you just give me a tour. No pressure. You only have an hour to do it. So don't say you can't do it.
Well, go back and do your thing, and I will see you in. I'll see you in an hour.
In an hour. Yeah.
All right.
Hey, good luck, buddy.
Thanks, man.
Don't forget to speak to your audience. Right? You're not alone. Don't go quiet forever. Just whatever you think, say it out loud.
All right, I'll do it.
Right. See you in a bit.
See you in a bit.